Officer O'Brien to the rescue. Why it's important to follow safety rules. Fire Officer O'Brien was always worried about fires. He wanted to prevent fires and he knew lots of safety tips. Once a week, Officer O'Brien shared his fire safety tips with the students of Smokytown School. His lectures were often boring, and nobody listened to him. Some students even fell asleep and snored. As he left the hall, Officer O'Brien spoke to the principal, Mr. Drench. Did you enjoy my lecture? Oh, I wasn't really listening, Mr. Drench replied. Officer O'Brien decided he needed an assistant. That might make his talks more exciting. Maybe then students would listen to his speech. I think I'll ask Scooter, he said. Scooter was a young fire officer who admired Officer O'Brien. He always obeys me, Officer O'Brien thought. He'll be a good assistant, Officer Scooter. The next week, Scooter and Officer O'Brien went to the school. Officer O'Brien wanted to talk about smoke alarms. He asked Scooter to carefully hold the smoke alarm. You must make sure that your smoke alarm is working, Officer O'Brien explained. Remember to check your batteries. Officer O'Brien looked over at Scooter to make sure he was paying attention. Scooter nodded back at him and smiled. You must press the button on the smoke alarm, Officer O'Brien explained to the students. Then you can hear if the smoke alarm is working. Oops. Press the button, please, Scooter. Scooter pressed the button. The smoke alarm started beeping very loudly. Scooter was not expecting such a loud noise. He jumped up in the air with fright. The smoke alarm went up into the air with him and landed on the wooden floor with a large clatter. Officer O'Brien was very angry. It was his favorite smoke alarm, and now it was broken on the floor. Poor Scooter looked terrified, angry. All students laughed. Oh, and the alarm has broken. Officer O'Brien began to scold Scooter. Why did you drop my smoke alarm? He shouted. It's my favorite alarm. How can I give safety tips if you break everything? Scooter tried to pick up the broken pieces from the floor, but he was afraid of Officer O'Brien. He dropped the pieces again every time Officer O'Brien shouted at him. The students all started laughing at poor Scooter. Next week, Officer O'Brien and Scooter went to the school again. Remember what I said at the station, Officer O'Brien told Scooter. Don't break anything. I won't, promised Scooter. Officer O'Brien walked onto the stage in the school hall. He was carrying a fire blanket. He proudly showed the fire blanket to the students. The students looked back at him in silence. Fire blanket. Scooter then followed Officer O'Brien onto the stage. Suddenly, an enormous cheer went up. The children all clapped for Scooter. So the children loved Scooter and they clapped for him. I want to talk to you today about fire blankets, Officer O'Brien said. They could save your life if you are ever near a fire. All the children were looking at Scooter. He smiled and waved back at them. The children cheered again. Even Mr. Drench smiled. You use a fire blanket to put out a fire, Officer O'Brien explained. You use a fire blanket to put out a fire. You throw it over the fire. Scooter will now show you how to use a fire blanket. Catch it! Catch, buddy! Officer O'Brien threw the blanket to Scooter. Scooter wasn't ready to catch the blanket. He was still smiling at the children. The blanket landed on Scooter's head. Scooter got frightened and tried to throw off the blanket. He couldn't see what he was doing and he tripped. Scooter and the blanket landed on the floor in a heap. Scooter and the blanket landed on the floor in a heap. The children all started laughing and cheering. Remember to throw the fire blanket on the fire, Officer O'Brien said, and not on yourself. Officer O'Brien felt sad as he left the school. I don't think anyone is listening to me, he said to Mr. Drench. They love your lectures now, said Mr. Drench. They love your lectures now. Make sure you come back next week and make sure you bring Scooter with you. The next week, Officer O'Brien and Scooter wanted to teach the children about fire extinguishers. When you see a fire, Officer O'Brien said, you can use the fire extinguisher to put out the fire. Show everyone how to use the extinguisher, Scooter. Extinguisher. When Scooter picked up the extinguisher, he accidentally pressed the handle. Oh, a jet of water shot across the stage and soaked Mr. Drench with a giant splash. Oh, I am so sorry, Officer O'Brien said to Mr. Drench. I'll never bring Scooter to this school again. It's only water, said Mr. Drench with a laugh. It's only water, and I was going to clean this suit again anyway. Officer O'Brien was shocked. So here I have I am so sorry, Officer O'Brien said to Mr. Drench. I'll never bring Scooter to this school again. It's only water, and I was going to clean this suit anyway. Officer O'Brien was shocked. But Scooter always causes trouble when he comes here, said Officer O'Brien. I know, and he also makes sure that nobody forgets these fire safety lectures. There's one safety tip I won't forget, Officer O'Brien said. Sometimes your body knows more than you do. Sometimes your body knows more than you do. And this is the end of the story. Goodbye.